The 12 disciples were the first celebrities of the new Christian age. The later church made full use of their status to legitimize its power. They were also very useful in its battle with other faiths. And with one disciple, this even meant inventing a completely new story for him. Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain is one of the greatest pilgrimage sites in all of Christendom. Ever since its founding in the 9th century, millions of Christian pilgrims have come here to worship at what they believe is the tomb of one of Jesus' 12 disciples. Another James, one whom the church regards as greater than the brother of Jesus. Although originally born in Palestine, this James is now not only the patron saint of Compostela, but the protector of the whole of Spain. James is one of the only disciples whose death is actually recorded in the Bible. In the book of Acts, it describes how he was executed by King Herod Agrippa in AD 44 in Jerusalem. But the first mentions of James coming to Spain didn't appear until the 8th century, more than 700 years later. 20 miles north of Santiago is the town of Padron, where according to tradition, after his death, James's body arrived in Spain. I wanted to know how it had got here from Jerusalem, nearly 3,000 miles away by sea. This is a long way from Palestine. Can you tell me the story of how James's body came to be here?
From Palestine, there were boats arriving here originally bringing stone containing tin ore. It was this stone that was originally traded here from Palestine. That's why it's said that St. James arrived here in a stone boat.
The cult of St. James appeared at a critical time for Europe. It was under attack from another emerging faith, Islam. Arab armies had already conquered large parts of Spain. A hero was needed to rally the Christian faithful. Who better than one of Jesus' disciples?
St. James was considered as the, if you like, the symbolic patron of the Christian struggle against the Muslims of southern Spain. In the later Middle Ages, St. James is portrayed in art and in sculpture as Santiago Matamoros, the Moor Slayer. He's normally portrayed on horseback, sword in hand, slain enemies underneath the hooves of his horse.
To promote the cult of St. James in Spain, it seems the church was prepared to believe in a totally new legend about his life. Under the altar of the church in Padron is a large stone pillar, to which, according to the tradition, the boat carrying St. James's body was moored when it arrived by river 2,000 years ago.
As you can see by that inscription, it says in Latin, pie credito, which means by pious belief. But by pious belief, it does not necessarily mean that it's a fiction or that it's a fantasy.
It has to be said that there's no definitive evidence that James had either travelled to Spain to preach or was buried in Spain until many, many centuries later. It's in the 7th century that we have the first reports or claims that James had travelled to Spain during his own lifetime to preach. There's also a hymn of praise from the Kingdom of Asturias in the north of Spain from the 780s, which makes the same claim. But none of these sources say that James was buried there.
According to the tradition, James's body lay hidden in a secret cave for 700 years. Then a local hermit saw a star in the sky which guided him to the burial site. He told the local bishop, and several years later, the first shrine was built on the site, and the town of Santiago grew up around it. Today, a massive cathedral dominates the area. The dean agreed to show me the cathedral's historical archive.
We know that the tomb of St. James was discovered in approximately 830. Here we can see the illustration of the Archbishop Theodomir of Iria Flavia finding the tomb of the Apostle James. And here is the illustration of Alfonso II, and beside it we find details of the privilege he granted this shrine.
Given that there were so many competing saints' cults, it was very important that a shrine had influential backers, that it had patronage, that it had publicists. And in the case of St. James, we know that members of the Asturian royal family were enthusiastic supporters.
At the end of the 19th century, the cathedral authorities began a massive archaeological investigation beneath the cathedral. It was a time when Christianity was under attack from new developments in science and history. The religious authorities were desperate to find scientific evidence to reinforce the legend of St. James and keep the faithful happy. They first uncovered a vast Roman necropolis, an ancient cemetery, with tombs dating back to the 1st century. Then, right below the cathedral's main altar, the church's archaeologists found another ancient tomb.
There they found the urn that contains the box that holds the remains of the apostle and his 2 disciples, St. Athanasius and St. Theodore. This was in 1879. Then there was a long process of authentication that lasted 5 years, and it was definitively decreed to be authentic by the Vatican on the 24th of July, 1884.
Can you be sure about what you found? Can you be absolutely certain that here we have the bones of the apostle?
Now, in this case, there is a very high level of certainty. We could say that all reasonable doubt, whether these relics are authentic or not, has been overcome. In other words, certainty outweighs all reasonable doubt.
José Suárez Otero is an independent local archaeologist.
From an archaeological point of view, we cannot guarantee that it is actually the Apostle St. James who is buried there. The problem is that those remains may or may not be the remains of the Apostle St. James, and it will always be difficult to prove it either way.
Is it important that the bones and the tomb are those of St. James?
Everything that has been built here and the flow of pilgrims have both been because of this fact. Of course, it is in our best interests that it is never proven to be a calculated untruth, like some people nowadays claim it to be.
If a shrine could flourish, large numbers of pilgrims would begin to visit that shrine. One important side product of pilgrims was they brought money to the shrine, and the bishopric of Santiago de Compostela becomes much richer.
It seems to me that in its bid to create a new Christian hero to champion Europe's battle with Islam, the Church lost sight of the real meaning of being a disciple. How they were prepared to commit their lives not to fight other believers, but to combat injustice and oppression all over the world.